Thanks for coming back. Thanks for sticking with me on this brake overview. Let's go full circle. Let's finish talking about the brakes. And remember, this is gonna be my last video for the year. I'm taking December off because I have training from my day job. So I'll be back in January, but enough with the chit chat. Let's get on it. Wearing out of the disc itself is an issue only after quite a bit of time. And it's the same thing with warping. Sometimes the disc gets warped. It might be a hit, especially on dirt bikes. It might be that you ride with your foot on the rear brake so that the pads stay on the disc long enough to bring the disc temperature to a temperature that, if not cooled properly, would actually warp the disc. Those are extreme cases. You can check it by lifting the rear tire, spinning it, and taking a look at the disc straight on. And if it looks like it's straight, there's no wobbling, you're good. But that is another aspect to look at. And since we're back here and we have easy access to this sensor over here, this is an ABS sensor, or this thing over here senses how fast the wheel is spinning, and if the wheel stops, the ABS sensor will send a signal to the ABS pump, and the ABS pump will release some pressure on the caliper so that you feel, in the old ABS system, you felt that sensation, that pulsating thing. The Scrambler still does it. Some modern bikes don't do it anymore, but this is what does that. Now, if you have an ABS light, or if the ABS system is giving you trouble, the first thing worth checking is the sensor. Sometimes those sensors crack right in the middle, and looking from the outside, everything looks just fine, but you might have a fault code, or the ABS system doesn't work anymore, or it doesn't work properly. Check the sensor for crack. First thing to do. This will save you so much money because a sensor is usually cheap. If you take it to the dealer because of an ABS problem, they're gonna start troubleshooting the system and you're gonna pay a ton. And instead it's an easy fix. It's a single bolt, remove and replace. So first thing, if you have ABS trouble, check that. Now that we said all of this, it's time to look at the fluid, the brake fluid and the reservoir. Hey guys, before we continue with the brakes, I really want to take a minute to recommend something. And it's one of those M-Gear gadget wallets. This is one of those new slick wallets that are out there right now. The real strength on this one is that it's highly customizable. Not just the material it's made of. Mine is made out of carbon fiber, actual carbon fiber, but I'm talking about the color. I'm talking about, as you guys can see, there is my logo printed on it. The reason why I really like this one is because the front plate can be removed, and when the front plate is removed, you can replace it with whatever else. Company logo, motorcycle picture, their company logo. It's really nice, it's really sturdy, but most of all, for me, it's little and strong enough to take on the dirt bike when I go dirt biking. I would love to have to customize it to the fullest, because you can actually attach stuff to the side of the wallet, but I really needed a sleek, smallest possible wallet, so this is what I chose. Go take a look at their website. I put a link in the description. I'm not getting paid for this. It's just because I love this thing so much. I'm doing most of the explaining on the rear side of the motorcycle. The reason why I'm using the rear as an example is because it's easier to see and to look at, especially when it comes to the reservoir. This thing over here, this little cup over there, is the reservoir. If you look inside, there is a yellow peel looking fluid in there, or a nice clear blonde beer. So it's supposed to be, without the bubbles, it's supposed to be nice and clear It's not supposed to be hazy, it's not supposed to be milky, supposed to be a light yellow color. And it's really not supposed to be all the way at the top, but we'll get that in a minute. Now, the brake fluid degrades over time, so it changes in color. It changes in color from light to dark, and then also if there is moisture getting into the system, it might actually turn milky. But so that's one thing that you need to look at. They might actually take a year or more to go bad, but as long as there is fluid in there and the fluid is above the minimum line, you are good with it. I'm not going to teach you how to flush the fluid right now in this video because that would be too long on top of everything else we've talked about so far, but there are a few things I need to point out. First of all, if you're doing a fluid flush, there is no need to have the ABS pump running unless the fluid is so bad, so very bad and contaminated that you absolutely need to remove every single drop of it. Now, inside the ABS pump, there is a very minimal amount of fluid. Every time I make a video about flushing the system, there is always this genius mechanic that tells me, oh, BMW told me that I need to run the ABS pump because otherwise not all the fluid is gonna go through and blah, 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 blah. Think about it. The ABS pump is between the brake and the caliper. It's somewhere in between. If the ABS pump had that much fluid in there, and if the fluid wasn't free to go through the ABS pump would actually actively prevent you from braking. Because their argument seems to be like, well, if you don't make the ABS pump run, the fluid, you're not going to be able to get all the fluid out because the fluid is not going to go through. The fluid will go through. That's a big myth. It's just like those guys that tell you to fill out the oil filter with fresh oil when you put it on, which is easy to do if the oil filter is in the bottom, but if the oil filter is on the front of the engine, you're just gonna make a mess. Usually the oil filter is below the filler line, so once the filler line is at level, the oil filter is full as well. On top of that, the engine, you're not rebuilding an engine, so the engine is not completely dry, that you need oil in there because otherwise you're gonna cause damage. You just did an oil change. When you drain the oil on an oil change, oil is still coating the rest of the engine, and when you start a modern bike, the time that pump takes to get the oil and send it back through the system, it's minimal. So, but some genius 1960s Chevrolet rebuilding guy always talks about filling up that, or it's usually Harley guys. I hate to keep talking bad about Harley guys, but there is a lot of misconception. There are real Harley riders, and then there is the weekend warrior that rides his Harley twice a year, mostly puts it in the back of his trailer, trails his Harley to whatever Harley shows, rides that half a mile to the show, like Sturgis or whatever, and then just sit on it. And those guys seems to have very high opinions on how to do things on. But now, rant over, back to the brakes. Another thing you need to look at when you look at the brake fluid is the amount of brake fluid in the reservoir. Do not ever add brake fluid to the reservoir if you haven't replaced the brake pads. Meaning, if because the fluid will go from the max line to the minimum line throughout the life of the brake pads. The more the brake pads thin out, so the more the piston on the caliper push out, the more fluid is going to be inside the caliper rather than inside the reservoir. If you top off the brake fluid before replacing the brake pads, when you replace the brake pads and you push those pistons back inside the caliper, you will overflow the reservoir. There is no way around it. That's just the way it is. So remember, as long as the fluid is between the max and the minimum line, you are fine. If it goes below the minimum line, put enough fluid in there to get back on top of the minimum line, but not all the way full unless you replace the brake pads. The brake fluid is very corrosive, so if that brake fluid falls on whatever painted part on your bike, you are going to ruin the paint on the bike. The back reservoir, it's a little less of a problem when you ruin something because it's back here, it's all rough parts and stuff. But the front reservoir, you can have brake fluid leaking on the tank, on the forks, is going to be noticeable. You do not want to do that. Before you open the brake reservoir, you need to clean the brake reservoir. And most caps on brake reservoir tell you, clean thoroughly before you open the brake reservoir. Inside there is a membrane, all right? In some motorcycles, the membrane is telescopic and extends down, so it looks like the brake fluid is always at max. But then when you remove the cap, the brake fluid goes down because the membrane retracts. That's a good system. You will not incur in the overfilling the reservoir if the membrane does its job. One last thing you need to look for is what kind of brake fluid you use. There are different levels of brake fluid: .3, .4, LV4, 5. I believe the KTM uses the 5.1. Look into your motorcycle manual and find the appropriate brake fluid to use with your brakes. Usually the .3, 4, 5 is not that the 5 is better than the 4, it's just that the 5 has a higher temperature rating than the 3 or the 4. So it's not that if you want to brake harder, you just replace your recommended .3 with .5 and there you have it. It's just a matter of chemical composition. It has nothing to do on how well your brakes are going to work in regular situations. And this is it. That's how they work. That's how you're supposed to maintain them. That's how you're supposed to use them. This is in no way supposed to make you a brake guru, but I hope I can give you a general understanding and cut down on a whole bunch of myths that gravitate around the brakes. So now you know what to look for, you know what to do in case you see one of those problems, and hopefully I'll save you some money. When it comes to money, thank you very much to my patrons because they're helping a lot and I really appreciate them. If you want to become a patron, check the link in the descriptions. If you don't want to become a patron and you just want to help the channel, get yourself one of those Master Shade 3 Mechanic shirts. They're fantastic, go check them out. Other than that, thank you very much to all for watching my videos and constantly coming back time after time to listen to me yap about motorcycles. So work on your bike and I'll see you next time.